Hi everyone. I want us to have a short revision lesson about the context of The Great Gatsby, and just to remind you of the basics, the book was written by F. Scott Fitzgerald. It was published in 1925. The author was 29 years old. He said that it had taken him about a year to write, but that he thought that it was 10 years better than anything that he'd ever done before. He was definitely sure it was going to be received as a novel about America and about the American dream, and in fact had been quarrelling, or at least pressing his publisher until really quite late in the piece, to entitle it Under the Red, White and Blue, which of course is a much weaker title than The Great Gatsby, though he himself thought that The Great Gatsby was only a moderately good title. He also said that he thought if it wasn't a huge success, then there would be two reasons for that. One of them was that the title was a bit uninteresting, and the second was that it didn't have a decent woman character. And that's a true statement and a criticism which some people make. He made that observation because he says women control the fiction market. So he was realising that it's the women who buy the books, and that he hadn't perhaps given the women enough of a likeable character that they would want to buy the books. He wanted it consciously to be an artistic achievement. He said that he wanted it to be something beautiful and simple and intricately patterned. And the patterns are something that you should return to as you go through. Look for the ways in which things foreshadow each other, mirror each other, and look in particular at what we call the chiasmatic, that's balanced structure of the thing. In chapter 5, dead centre of the book, that's where Daisy and Gatsby meet. And throughout the book, you'll find this sense of balance, that there's a prologue, there's an epilogue, and so on and so on. It works into the middle. That's a pattern. At the time he was writing, America had been transformed by an overwhelming process of industrialisation and urbanisation, which had completely changed the way that America was. And one of the things that we can say about Gatsby, the man, the character, is that traditional American beliefs, the values of independence, of trying hard, dreaming, being able to make a success of yourself, that became less and less plausible considering the developments that had taken place in the world. Those were beliefs which had been nurtured back in the agrarian past when the founding fathers were establishing the country itself. But events had changed that, and there was a great deal of disillusionment, and writers, particularly at this time, became very critical of this received view. Fitzgerald and Zelda lived at Great Neck, which is the place that's disguised as West Egg. They actually lived there in the 1920s, so it's a true setting for the novel, and it was very popular with showbiz people. So we've looked already at the Jazz Age and the kind of hedonism and self-indulgence that was everywhere, and you'll notice that in the book we have a song called Ain't We Got Fun, and nothing's surer, the rich get rich and the poor get poorer, but in the meantime, ain't we got fun? And that's pretty much the anthem for the social group that we're talking about. There are a lot of resonances with Fitzgerald's own life. He's a huge party goer, really wild parties. He was drunk, drank far too much, and he suffered from this sense of not being part of the in crowd. He knew and was associated with very wealthy people, but he himself was not one of them. He'd grown up in the Midwest, and we know that that's one of the major themes of the novel, is the contrast between the fast, money-grubbing, go-getter, make-it-on-your-own world of the East, New York, and the stolid, farming, not romantic, not interesting, but morally virtuous Midwest, which is where he had grown up, in St. Paul, Minnesota. We also know that he went to Princeton University, where which has been described by him, I think, as the biggest country club in the US, a very posh place where he was not socially from the same background as the people that he was mixing with. Very grand buildings, etc., magnolia trees the size of houses, lots and lots of money, lots of privilege, and he was an outsider in that world, although because of his writing and acting prowess, he did actually occupy a fairly prominent position in student life. He never got his degree. He didn't pass, and he wasn't going to pass. And the university had hinted that it would be a good idea if he just withdrew, because that would spare him the embarrassment of being failed in his degree. But at that exact time, the United States had decided to join in World War I. This was in 1917. And they undertook a recruiting drive amongst the universities, an officer recruiting drive amongst the universities, because shortcut to knowing that you've got intelligent people. And he signed up, and he went to training camp in Montgomery, Alabama, which is where he met his wife-to-be, Zelda. And she's not unlike Daisy, probably not quite as swanky, but she's from a well-to-do family. Her father was a judge. She's a Southern belle. She's somebody that all the boys love. She's terribly pretty, rather outrageous. And the women we do see in the novel are advanced for their time. They shorten their hair, they wear short skirts, they drink, they smoke. They're living a more independent life than their mothers and older sisters did. It's pretty fast times, and if you want to take part, then you can indeed have a lot of fun. Zelda was very much part of that set, and even as late as the 1950s, Fitzgerald was not remembered fondly by the people that he'd lived near in Long Island. He never paid the rent. He was always noisy. He was a bit of a he was a party boy. However, he could write like an angel, and that is the main thing that we're going to be dealing with. Another thing to mention is the almost caricature array of characters that we have in this book. You've got the Southern belle, you've got the stupendously successful, wealthy, inherited wealth Tom Buchanan, who thinks that everything that should come his way and that other people are unimportant, in contrast with the Wilsons, with Myrtle, who is on the make. She's up and coming. She's a brash, vulgar woman whose association with Tom Buchanan makes her seem more socially important. She's a social climber. She's interested in aping the habits of the rich, which is why she buys the little dog and changes her dress several times during the course of one party. Her husband is a faded and pale man, and the other people who live in the Valley of the Ashes are these ghost-like figures. It's like the underworld. These are people who have descended into a pit from which they cannot ascend. It's as if it's a graveyard. The people who did not achieve the American dream, the people who have nowhere much to go. Add to that Wolfsheim, who is a gangster. We find out at the very end of the book that Gatsby made his money by doing dubious deals with Wolfsheim, and they make illegal liquor. Remember that this is a time where alcohol is officially banned in the United States. All that did was backfire badly, so that there was plenty of alcohol around, but none of it was legally obtainable. And what happened was that this triggered a massive growth in organised crime. The mafia became a real force. Based in Chicago, one of the most famous gangsters is Al Capone. There was think Bonnie and Clyde, think Some Like It Hot, which is a movie that you may not have seen. Machine guns, robberies, illegal distills, people having these crazy wild parties until the police stop them. Of course, all you have to do to prevent that happening is to pay the police off. So it's a world in which shady dealings and the underworld and being a crook is something that's pretty big and pretty obvious. And so we have Wolfsheim, who comes from that world. And we learn that really where Gatsby got his money was also from that world. So it's a very self-conscious and exaggerated picture of Americanness. The people in the West are deeply dull. The people in the East are frightfully lively. And he's certainly exaggerated the sorts of things that happen. We might leave it there and move into a quick summary of chapter